Before America's debate on same-sex marriage, before Harvey Milk took public office, boldly declaring he was gay and proud of it. And even before Stonewall and the first gay pride parades. To be gay or lesbian was a crime. But in 1965, a group of ministers held a dance in San Francisco that changed everything.
We have to remind ourselves of history, and this is sacred history now. And a lot of people paid pretty heavy prices, the same as you do in every civil rights movement.
San Francisco, a city which throughout its history has been called Queen of the West. This vibrant metropolis was planned by pioneers who foresaw the important role this city would play. From the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco looks like a veritable fairyland in the distance.
I moved to San Francisco after I finished law school and went to work for Southern Pacific in the president's office, where I was for 2 years. Then I left Southern Pacific to open my own law office. It was about that time that I separated from my wife because I knew that I wanted to act on my gay orientation.
When I came out to San Francisco, I think it was 1952. At that time, the Tenderloin was very busy, and so we had a lot of fun. It was great.
In this city, it is the people of San Francisco who have made it great and famous, who are responsible for its beauty, romance, and color. People who have a jealous pride in their city and share a common love for all of the grandeur and might which it possesses.
We'd been here in the city for 2 years, and we hadn't found any lesbians. And in September, this woman called Nani called and said, how would you like to join us and me and my partner and 2 other couples in starting a secret lesbian society? And we said, of course.
I was born in Oakland in 1942, and I met some people that brought me over for my 21st birthday to the Black Cat. And I got to see Jose do his number up there, and I saw this gay thing. And
San Francisco, a city carefree and gay, friendly and tolerant, which will make for still more gracious living and creates a cordial feeling between them, which is reflected by the lowly and the great alike.
So I called my husband and told him I had left my job. He said, good, you always hated that job anyway. So we looked in the encyclopedia, and we looked at San Francisco, and it had about 2 pages. So we decided San Francisco was obviously the place to go. So we ended up here in 1961, just when things were getting started.
It was an era when demonstrators almost routinely poured into the streets demanding change. Protesting against the Vietnam War, challenging prejudice against African Americans, women. In San Francisco, the human rights movement was just beginning to acknowledge gay and lesbian rights as well. And that cause was advanced by an unexpected group. Straight ministers, who were probably as surprised about it as anyone.
We were serving a parish, and Hayward, California. We got a call, and they asked me to come over and talk to the people at the Glide Urban Center on the corner of Taylor and Ellis in San Francisco. And they offered me the job to leave a very fine parish and to move to San Francisco and to find out why young people didn't go to the Methodist Church anymore. But they all didn't go to the Presbyterian Church or the Catholic Church or any churches.
I came to San Francisco in January of 1964 to develop a mission parish for the Lutheran Church in America in North Beach.
I came to San Francisco in June of 1964 to help develop a ministry in North Beach. We discovered there were gay and lesbian people living there to whom we could minister.
The first thing that I found out was the fact that the young girls complained constantly that there weren't available young men. They would go down to Polk Street, and those young men on Polk Street were more interested in other young men on Polk Street than they were in the girls. They put up a $10,000 reward if I could find a way to change these young men into being more interested in the young women. Nobody ever claimed that reward.
We realized that we didn't know too much about the gay community in San Francisco. And the gay community came to us and said, we want to tell you right here and now that if you are going to have any impact whatsoever on the community, if you're going to be able to have any inroads, then what you need to do is to go with us bar hopping. And so for 2 nights in a row, the members of the gay community took us bar hopping.
We decided, Vinny and I, to go out and eat at gay bars. So every night we would eat at a different gay bar.
There were different bars for different people. The prejudices were strong within the gay community, whether you were a leather person or a drag queen or ribbon clerk. Ribbon clerk is a guy that works in an office.
The motorbike crowd and at the piss elegant crowd, as they called them. And we used to go down and Vinny would say, those guys are beautiful. They bring out the missionary spirit in me.
The individuals were impressed that church people were in there, and we were not proselytizers. We were only about presence and showing concern.
We got to be known in all the gay bars. They called me the gay priest of fairyland for a while, which I got a kick out of.
Gay bars then were the community's only recreation. You could go to a different gay bar every night for a month and not go to the same one twice. It sounds great, except that what isn't said is that there was a lot of police harassment.
For example, there was a bar on Turk Street at the time called Chuckers.
The Chucker here in the Tenderloin, you guys hear about the Chuckers? There was a sign out there that said, featuring police harassment nightly.
Of course, everyone wanted to dance, but you couldn't dance because the police would come in and you know, that would be considered lewd and lascivious conduct.
You couldn't dance in the bars, you couldn't hold hands in the street. Gay events were harassed. Even if they didn't come in, they'd park a police car with the light going in front of the place. Well, you don't, what do you need, right? You don't have to come in.
It was not unusual at that time for police to send in good-looking plainclothes cops and entrap people into making a solicitation.
The experience of being arrested wasn't that unusual to me because I had been, detained before by the police. So it wasn't that traumatic. You know, it was just something that you dealt with. It was just part of part of sitting and living at that time.
Oral copulation carried up to 15 years in state prison. Anal copulation carried up to life imprisonment.
There was always the fear that if your name was published in the paper, you don't want your employer to know you're gay, you could lose your job. You don't want your family to know you're gay, you could be kicked out of the family. You go to gay bars, you were liable to be beat up as you left.
One night I got a call, and I went to a hotel, and here were two gay guys with their genitals kicked in. And I said, call the police. And they said, we can't call the police because there's a police that did the kicking. We took them to the hospital, and the hospital wouldn't take them in. The doctor at the ER room said they're dirty, filthy queers.
This officer was notorious for beating up gay people. Everybody knew to be on the lookout for him, because he would do that to anybody he could catch alone at night and just beat them up.
A lot of us had tried early on to get in contact with City Hall, you know, say, hi, you know, how would you like to fix things up so it isn't so bad around you? And they wouldn't pay any attention to us.
Basically, people who lived an openly gay life were outlaws.
I went to the homophile organizations and asked for their tutelage and help to help me understand that community. I went to the Mattachine Society.
The Mattachine Society had been around for a long time. Hal Call and Don Lucas, both of whom are dead now, were basically the Mattachine Society. And it was supposedly for education purposes.
I went to the Daughters of Bilitis because I wanted to know about the women.
I think the woman whose idea the whole thing was to begin with wanted to start something where lesbians would be safe.
I went to the Citizens for Individual Rights.
I joined SIR mainly for social reasons because they were always having great parties.
SIR started the first bowling league. We started a legal referral group. It was sort of like a social service agency for gay people.
Then there was something called the Coits. I think that was a social organization. The Tavern Guild.
Tavern Guild was one of the organizations that made a big difference insofar as it had direct contact with the police department.
But you know, some of these organizations were basically organizations on paper. Their membership was either too timid to be identified, or the membership was very, very small.
Yeah, those organizations were all unto themselves, and I'll talk about bitch fights. Oh my goodness. But it was hard because people were living lies, and they were having to be not whole people. They were one people a church and one people on the street, and you know, had secret meetings, you know, and secret signals.
My straight name is Fred F. Alvarez. The gay name, or the name I used in gay circles, was Al Alvarez. Here you are at work and you get a phone call. Somebody calls and asks for Al or asks for Fred. Right away you know where it's coming from.
We also began to see what the reaction was of the church fathers representing the denominations. It was a total lack of understanding of sexual orientation. They knew about what people did, but they were afraid of it.
The ministers were thinking that they could put together an organization that would help gay people feel welcome in the community and in the churches in the community.
As part of our creating awareness to what was happening in San Francisco, Chuck and I invited our straight clergy friends and equal number of gay and lesbian people to be present in our living room and have conversation.
A lot of people called. It was like we were running a little switchboard, and get ministers from out of town coming in and they say, "We understand you have a homosexual here. We'd like to meet one."
We had many people come and would take them on tours of the gay bars and go to Finocchio's at some of the shows so that they could experience drag queens too.
Well, we had a retreat at White Memorial Retreat Center. We invited representatives of all the churches, ministers and their wives, and then persons in the gay community.
I remember saying, who the hell wants to spend a whole 3-day weekend with a bunch of ministers? Because, you know, I think if the ministers had weird ideas about gay people, some of us had weird ideas about ministers.
We talked about it among TOB members, and I think somebody said to us that we ought to go, that we might be surprised.
Yeah.
This was the first time in my history that I know that people openly identified themselves as being gay that sat down with clergy for a weekend conference.
Out of that came the Council on Religion and the Homosexual.
I was a charter member of the governing board, and one of the things that was needed at that time was financing.
So we all sort of got together to raise money for the CRH.
It was decided that we ought to do something to show that homosexuals did the same thing as heterosexuals did.
It was decided to have a dance. It was called the Mardi Gras. It was a Mardi Gras ball. Although it wasn't Mardi Gras, it was on New Year's Day.
United as never before, all 6 gay and lesbian organizations stood as one to fight for their rights. The Mattachine Society and the Citizens News promised to advertise the event. The Tavern Guild would staff the bar, and SIR would take responsibility for decorating. The organizations would each sell tickets for the event at a $1 kickback for their efforts.
And so we decided to have this dance, but I wouldn't do it unless I first of all went to the police.
Ted McElvenna and other clergy did meet with the police department to attempt to tell them what was going to happen, so that the harassment that had already existed in the gay community in those days would not happen again.
As an attorney, they wanted me involved because we wanted to have it completely on the up and up. At that time, you had to get permits for dance from the police. A bizarre thing. Basically, you had to kind of pass their muster.
They tried to meet with the chief of police. When they got to the police department, they were directed to meet with the vice squad instead.
And the first thing they said to me when I walked into that meeting, the man said, "Do you believe that masturbation is a sin against God?" And I said, "You gotta be kidding."
At first, the police took the position that it could not be a costume ball because people were limited in dressing in clothes of the opposite sex to Halloween.
The police had a fit. This idea of men in dresses was just absolutely terrible.
There was a law in the books in those days, and probably still is, that anyone on the streets of San Francisco in a disguise is subject to arrest. All this means is that if you commit a bank robbery and you wear a stocking mask, if they can't get you for the bank robbery, they can always get you for wearing a disguise in public. But for the first time, they were going to use this against the gay community.
We finally persuaded them that there was no law against a man putting on a dress.
They spent about an hour questioning me about sex acts, what was normal, what was not normal.
And at some point, they pounded on the desk, one of them did, I don't know which one, and said, "If you're not going to uphold God's law, we will."
We got the dance permit. But in fact, of course, this was considered a private event. We did not sell tickets very deliberately at the door.
They promised me that they would not interfere in any way as long as we had our own law enforcement people there, and we did our own policing. And I didn't believe a word they said. They were just lying through their teeth right from the beginning.
They signed a contract reserving California Hall on Polk Street for the dance. However, the police department contacted the hall's owners, trying to get them to cancel. That required the ministers to meet 2 more times with the police department.
We arrived at the day, New Year's Day. My partner and I went down there.
I had some friends for dinner that night, and we all went to the ball. I'd been to Europe and picked up this Italian sailor's outfit, so I thought, oh, that'd be really hot for to wear to the party.
The dance for me was just going to the bathroom and having the toilet seat up. Someone asked if he could dance with me. I did, and discovered that when I got out on the floor that I was leading.
It's a big hall, and you've got 200 people. They're dancing, you know. There were blacks dancing with whites. There were Asians with whites, Asians with blacks. I'd never seen that racial intermix. Oh, yes, I've been to things that, you know, people pretend. But no, they're all getting along.
Naturally, we were looking around for other contacts, you know, and I met Conrad. He was from LA. And so we, you know, spent some time together drinking and getting to know one another and dancing.
When people were coming in, we noticed they seemed to be sort of upset or
very quiet.
When we got near California Hall, we saw that there were Klieg lights, and in fact, the police were there taking pictures of people who were going in.
Eventually, one of the ministers looked outside, to open the door and looked outside and found
there was already a police car at either end of the block, a paddy wagon directly across the street from the entrance to California Hall, a still photographer photographing everybody who entered and left, and a movie photographer who was also photographing everybody who entered and left.
Now, this didn't bother me, but it did bother a lot of people. We were still outlaws.
Some people took one look at these cameras and they turned right around and left.
So that really upset us. I mean, we thought we had a deal made.
And it was the first time in San Francisco history that 500 gay men and women gathered together in one spot. And the police did not know how to handle this.
What astounded me was that some of these drag queens are coming up, you know, with all the lights, and here's a police photographer, and they're saying, I'll take 2 of these, honey, and give me 2 of these, and, you know, just to the, you know, cops that are trying to be intimidating. So they weren't intimidated.
And what really had blown the police department out of the water, as far as I know, is that there were anywhere from 6 to 10 clergy who were there with their wives or significant others or whoever they came with.
The church gave legitimacy to this experience.
Some of the ministers' wives were saying, you know, I don't understand what the problem is with the police, that this is ball like we would have.
I remember Cecil Williams' wife at that time, Evelyn, saying, boy, this is sure just like down south.
Guy Straight got up on the stage, they stopped the music, they turned the lights up, and he said, there's nothing to be worried about. Don't be alarmed. The police have the building surrounded. Like, you know, jumping up and yelling, fire! Nah, everybody turned the music back on, everybody went back to dancing.
Evander and I were there, just kind of a cautionary thing, having a couple of lawyers there. There were 3 police officers, they were plain clothes. They came in and they wanted to inspect the exits. So we said, go ahead. Not 10 minutes later, different police came in. This was a lot of attention to a private function. But we said, go ahead. A third group came in. I believe these were in uniform. A fourth time, 3 plainclothes officers. They said they had another inspection to make. Evander and I looked at each other, and I remember saying, God damn it, no. If you're going to come in, you're going to come in with a search warrant. And then, all of a sudden, it seemed like the entryway filled up with police.
Both Herb and Evander were arrested, taken outside, frisked, placed into a paddy wagon, and taken away.
While we were sitting in the paddy wagon, I remember Cecil Williams came out. He said, that the ministers were prepared to get arrested if we wished. And I said, no, don't do that. You'll be better as witnesses rather than as co-defendants.
And then this was about the time that Clay Caldwell, the minister, called the cops and said, help us.
He was told, well, there's police officers there, why don't you tell them? And he said, they're the problem.
They came back, and the guy, his name was Rudy Nieto, he walked up to me and said, we're here to inspect the premises. And I said, under advice of attorney, you have to have a warrant. This is a private party. And he flashed me his badge and said, I don't need a warrant, I have this. And I said, well, that's not going to get you in. So he grabbed me and started hauling me out the front door. And Elliot Layton, who's another attorney we had called after Herb and Evander left, came out and protested my being arrested and their being there and whatever he could think of to protest, so they took him too.
When I saw this was happening, I immediately left, and I went home to North Beach and got my little pony camera that only took 8 slides at a time, and had flash bulbs in those days where you had to put a new bulb in every time you took a picture.
He was taking pictures of the cops and tucking them down Joe's cleavage for safekeeping.
And I put it in my bra because that's what I had to put it in.
And I don't know whatever happened to those photos either.
Well, I think he gave them to...
oh, you think he gave them to Guy Straight?
Yeah, Guy Straight, and for his
paper, yeah. Could be.
And then he got arrested and so on, and we don't know what happened to them.
Yeah, well, Conrad and I were dancing. We were dancing close, of course, getting a little romantic. The police, I didn't know he was a policeman at the time, but anyway, he came up and asked us to come with him. I thought, he had something to do with the party. Then when we got outside, he told us that we were under arrest. So.
By that point, everybody was in a slight state of panic, and everybody started to leave. But the police were still outside taking photographs.
They were escorting people out, and we knew that the reason we were there was just to get people out of the dance. The fun was gone. It had a new purpose.
One of the clergy reached out with his coat and held his coat aside and would get 6 people in behind him that would rush out onto the street and jump into a waiting limousine. After doing that about twice, one of the police officers took the clergy aside and said, I want you to know that you are interfering with an officer in the line of duty, and if you ever do that again, you too will be arrested.
They took the paddy wagon over to Northern Station, and we were put in a cell.
While I was at Northern Station, I was taken into an interview room, and they asked me where I worked. At the time, I was working for a Teamsters Security Fund. One of the things that we had was a little booklet in the gay community that said, don't ever tell them where you work. It was like rule number 1. And so I asked the woman that this is not going to get back to my employer. Oh, no. Good heavens.
The policeman that led us to the cell said, well, you've been detained for lewd and lascivious conduct, he said, make sure you don't make it any worse by what you do in the cell. So I thought that was pretty nice of him to warn us anyway. Not that we were in a romantic mood at that point.
Somebody came over to get us and took us back to the dance, and it was chaotic by that time. Police were roaming all over the dance floor and trying to make some arrests.
We were bailed out. We went back to where the party was, but they were just cleaning up.
We went back to my place and had drinks and a little breakfast, and that was it.
I was so angry at that point, I could not get into the car and drive. So I said, Joe, I'm walking. And as I did, I went down the street and had a whole pocket full of flashbulbs at that point. And I would take them out and smash them against the wall as I went, just to get rid of my rage that I had. And I stopped at one point and I saw two police officers in the front of a hotel marquee lobby. And they were standing there talking to the desk clerk, and I found myself standing on the curb, white-knuckled, just loathing and hating them. There was a fence outside of the building where I had my apartment, and I stood in front of that fence, suddenly broke down crying, sobbing, and hanging onto this fence.
Jim and I had just bought a home and moved in about a week before. I varied between rushes of optimism and also some depression. I said to myself, how the hell did I ever get into this? Because I saw my career going down the drain. But then when we went to bed, it was very touching because just as we were going to bed, Jim put his arm around me and said, I'm so proud. I didn't sleep very well that night, and the first thing I knew when I woke up was a telephone call from Evander saying, this is terrible, did you see the paper?
At that time, there were 3 newspapers in San Francisco as the front page of every newspaper in town. You know, everybody I knew, or everybody I worked with, you know, knew what had happened. It was nothing that I could hide.
Next day, there were headlines in the paper. Secretary for Teamsters arrested at gay something or other.
You know, as I say, being arrested wasn't such a big deal, but when they published my age in the newspaper, all my friends were calling him, oh, my dear, I didn't realize that you were that old. Because I was 29 for quite a few years.
I have to be honest about it. I intended this to be a confrontation right from the beginning. We expected that to happen. We expected the police to overreact. And I've always felt a little bit guilty because I was using the people.
I think that the straight and the church community got mad. And I mean, I think the police were already mad, so that was and I think then it became, okay, we had drawn attention, we saw the reaction, it was no longer hearsay. We saw it, we experienced it, and something had to be done.
The phone rang. It was Ted McAvenna, and he said, Chuck, we're going to call a press conference for Monday morning.
What the minister said in the press conference basically was that they chastised San Francisco for the way they treated their homosexual citizens.
I didn't know what to expect, but in fact, there was good media coverage.
For once, they would use the word homosexual and lesbian, whereas before, you know, the Examiner was a family paper. They weren't going to use it. This was such an important thing that they couldn't help but cover it.
we got a telephone call from Marshall Krauss of the ACLU that if we needed representation, the ACLU would be glad to represent us. I've been grateful to the ACLU ever since.
When I went back to work, of course they called me into personnel and said, well, what's all this? And I said, well, this is a case that the American Civil Liberties Union is very interested in, and so they're going to pursue it. So, they said, well, we will wait until you find the outcome of your trial.
The dance generated several legal actions. The police themselves were sued for millions by the Council for Religion and the Homosexual.
We had a private meeting, and they wanted this dismissed. And I said, all right, as far as we're concerned, you don't have to pay us anything, you don't have to do anything. If there's any more violence or harassment, you understand that we will come back.
It didn't end as well for the two men charged with lewd and lascivious conduct for dancing together.
Evander Smith was the attorney, and Herb Donaldson.
The jury trial actually took, I think, over a week, which is a long time for a misdemeanor trial.
We actually had to get up and testify what went on and what our version of the story was.
In chambers, the judge, he said, I don't think they're in any danger. Well, he was wrong.
Eventually, it went to the jury, and the jury came back that we were guilty.
Judge Lascivious said, oh, they've suffered enough. I'm going to fine them $25.
It would be on our record for 6 months, and after that, the record would be expunged.
I felt terrible about that. Because I felt I should have followed my instincts and said we will not represent them, because the two lawyers were two lawyers who were at the dance and who were also arrested on different charges.
I went back to work and I said, oh, well, the trial's over and, everything's fine. They didn't ask me any details. But apparently the CIA checked in and found out that we were guilty. And so they had to let me go.
They suffered the consequences, as people did then.
They put on my record that I was fired for moral turpitude. So a few months later, I got another job, and they called me down to personnel, and they said, what is this about moral turpitude? They thought I'd been stealing or something like that. And once I explained it was the California Hall, disaster, they said, oh, that's perfectly all right, no problem.
The trial that attracted most attention and made history concerned those who tried to block the police from entering the dance.
Evander and I were on trial. Elliot Layton was also on trial, and Nancy May. We were all combined. The courtroom was full. Full of a lot of well-wishers. A lot of the ministers and their wives were there. The jury was selected. The opening statements were made.
One of the first things the judge asked the police captain was, did you ask for people's permission before you took their pictures? Well, no.
Judge Leo Friedman asked Officer Rudy Nieto, why the cameras? Officer Nieto replied, a great number of these kinds of people are involved in crimes.
One other thing we found out was the fact that every police officer had been given 50 identification cards. So the original intent had been to make mass arrests at this dance.
The DA was still on his direct examination, and Judge Friedman broke in and said, well, why did you need 50 arrest cards? What were you expecting? And he just hammered away like that, like he was a defense lawyer.
They accused me of pounding on Officer Nieto's chest. Now, this man was about 6'2" or 6'3". He was very tall. And so the judge asked the officer to step up and for me to demonstrate how I was pounding on his chest. And as soon as I got close to him, everybody in the court started laughing, and that was the end of that.
And the judge then turned to the jury and said, I want you to go and deliberate shortly. but I want you to bring back a verdict of not guilty.
And he said, no, you don't have to follow my instructions, but I will tell you that if you find them guilty, I will set aside your verdict and dismiss the case.
He went out, and when they came back 20 minutes later, he said, what took you so long? And he said, well, it took us 20 minutes to choose a foreman.
So it didn't really work out like the police thought. And in fact, the newspaper or the wire service carried some kind of communication from the police that there were it was either 70 or 75,000 homosexuals in San Francisco, which really was a gross exaggeration at that time. But when that went over the wire services, you can imagine, gay people on the East Coast and elsewhere reading that and saying, this is where I want to go.
I think that really changed a lot after that. And the police were, because they had kind of received a lot of bad publicity and a lot of bad feeling, I think were more liberal after that. They weren't quite so, tight-ass about it all.
By the time the dance was to be held the following year, the police department called the Tavern Guild and said, how many police officers would you like us to have? Would you like us to block off the block for you? Can we help in any way to make sure that the dance is a success?
Soon afterwards, there was dancing at a little place, Big Basket. It was called the Big Basket. The person involved there started to allow dancing.
Well, a lot of the harassment stopped at that point, and that's the reason why the gay organization did prosper. The organizations realized that they had to become political to make a change.
Jose would say, united we stand, divided they'll catch us one by one. And it pretty much became the philosophy then, that we knew that we had to get together and protect each other, even if we didn't agree with each other's lifestyle. It had to be, our concern had to be the whole community. Before, nobody talked about, being gay or being harassed or anything like that. But after the case, it became, much more open. People talked about it, even, my straight friends at work and things like that were very interested in the fact that, I could be, thrown in jail for dancing with somebody of the same sex at a party. Not only did the gay community come out of the closet, the straight community came out as well with their feelings about how they felt people should be treated overall.
At the dance, yes, it was gay and straight people together making that decision to have that dance. And the church brought that legitimacy.
Most of the benefits of the gay community are individual, lesbian and gay, transgender, and bisexual people, the freedoms that they have, that those freedoms were won by law, and they can be taken away by law too. So the answer is ever vigilant. Otherwise, the freedoms that we think we have today, and we do have, can easily be taken away from us.
I mean, I don't think we thought we were doing anything so monumental, but it turned out to be really important, yeah.
When you're there, though, at the time, and you're 20, 21 years old, what the hell, it's just another event. It's just something else that happened. You look back on it now, and it's, a hysteric landmark, historical thing.
The experience was really a positive one for me, although at the time it was pretty traumatic. It turned out it was one of my peak experiences.
Would we do it again? I don't know. I suppose we would, because we never even had any hesitation about it. We just said, that's what we have to do. That was the task in front of us. And we did it and moved on. When the DA was summing up, for the jury at the trial, he said, your decision today will affect how these people will be perceived for some time to come.
I thought that was very interesting that he would kind of threaten them that way, to say, if you let these people go, you'll have more and more of this going on all the time. So, and he was right. We were just getting warmed up.